Hello and good evening. I'm Don Arleth and welcome to World News Tonight. We will not let the French people have the presidential election stolen from them, says French far-right leader Marine Le Pen, after embezzlement conviction saw judges bar her from politics for 5 years. Before the ban, she was the leading candidate for the 2027 presidential election. Is this politically motivated, or is this justice for breaking the law? We'll get to that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Will Elon Musk's political activity be capped at 130 days? Pressure on Taiwan has many guessing about America's reliability as an ally. And Polish presidential candidates eager to highlight their policies. Shock and disbelief among the far right in France after the conviction of Marine Le Pen for embezzlement of EU funds saw her barred from politics for 5 years. If upheld, this would mean that she cannot run in the 2027 presidential elections, in which she is currently a frontrunner. Le Pen is calling this a political decision and vows to appeal the ruling and continue to fight. Her allies from Europe, the Kremlin, and the White House have all expressed deep concern about the ban. Kazimierz Wysiak reports.
A day after her conviction, French far-right leader Marine Le Pen hasn't minced words on her 5-year ban on running for public office.
The system brought out the nuclear bomb. And if they are using such a powerful weapon against us, it is obviously because we are on the verge of winning the elections.
Le Pen has been leading in opinion polls ahead of the 2027 presidential election. Her sentencing has sent shockwaves across the world, with right-wing leaders expressing outrage.
That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. I know all about it, and a lot of people thought she wasn't going to be convicted of anything.
Marine Le Pen and more than 20 of her National Rally colleagues have been convicted for misusing European Parliament funds intended for European aids to pay the salaries of their own party employees working in France. The court has found them guilty of embezzling more than €4 million in the last decade. So, is this sentencing politically motivated? Legal experts are baffled at such suggestions.
It is for sure not political. It is about legal principles. It's about being equal to the law. It's about the principles of their behavior as public figures. And by violating the law, by misappropriation of the public funds, of the European Parliament funds, they should be held accountable.
According to Jovanka Jakubek-Lalik, a law professor at Warsaw University, using European funds to cover party expenses breaks the fundamental rules of democracy.
The French court, in their justification of the verdict, explained that from the elected politicians, from the public figures, we as citizens should expect more. We should expect honesty and we should expect respect to the democratic principles.
The unspoken winner of this situation could be the National Rally leader, Jordan Bardella. With Le Pen banned from running, he could be the next in line as candidate for president.
I think that they are trying to portray themselves as political martyrs, and this is where the strategy will lie, to say that they are the victim of the French politics.
Far-right political parties across Europe are also capitalizing on Le Pen's conviction. In Poland, pro-Russian nationalist presidential candidate Sławomir Mencen drew a comparison between France and Romania.
Le Pen, who is leading in the polls, will likely be excluded from the French presidential election. This comes after Romania's judicial system also removed candidates who might pose a threat to it.
But one Polish MEP was quick to point out a rather obvious way of avoiding legal consequences.
Just don't steal then.
While Marine Le Pen's lawyers have said they will appeal the court's decision, far-right party members are encouraging the French to rally behind her. The verdict may be the end of her political career, but could also serve as fuel for the far-right populist narratives in the future. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Wysiak.
Elon Musk has likely been making just as many headlines as the U.S. president since Donald Trump took office, tasked with drastically cutting spending from the federal budget as head of the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short. The world's wealthiest man has alienated a lot of Republican voters in the process. However, this time, his time may be limited. As head of DOGE and a temporary government employee, Musk is set to leave the post after 130 days. For more details, we go to Marek Steele.
Elon Musk, the tech billionaire who became Trump's right hand. His political career could end sooner rather than later.
I think he's amazing, but I also think he's got a big company to run, and so at some point he's going to be going back.
Due to his role in the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, Musk is a temporary employee. This means he has a 130-day cap on his service at the White House, which ends in May. On Fox News, he complained about how the role is hurting his business.
If I wasn't in the government, I could lobby, and I could push for things that are advantageous to my companies, and probably receive them. My companies are suffering because I'm in the government.
Despite the complaints, Musk's mission in the government continues.
Let me first hand out 2 $1 million checks in appreciation.
With him now influencing a Wisconsin Supreme Court election, on Tuesday, the residents of the state are choosing one of the court's 10 justices.
The reason for the checks is that it's really just to get attention.
The Wisconsin election is seen as a referendum on the second Trump administration. The campaign leading up to Tuesday's vote has become the most expensive judicial race in U.S. history.
If Musk is going to come to Wisconsin to try to buy his votes, people ought to know that it's just bribery.
However, Musk's initial goal was to cut government spending through the Department of Government Efficiency.
So his working away is kind of done. He's extended his influence by getting inside the U.S. agencies, by dismantling the oversight, by stripping out a lot of the employees.
The Trump administration is facing another referendum on its support. Florida is holding votes on Tuesday to replace former Republican representatives Matt Gaetz and Mike Waltz.
There is the concern amongst Republican analysts that Musk is a liability, but as long as Donald Trump is seeking to really effectively be an autocrat, in other words, working in this new way where there are no checks on his power, then Musk is an asset.
The elections in Florida and Wisconsin, heavily influenced by Musk's dollars, could be a test for the billionaire's influence over American politics. For TVP World, I'm Marek Steele.
Despite reaching a ceasefire on striking each other's energy infrastructure, Russia does not appear to agree with the terms. Instead of preparing for peace, Russia announced another mobilization. According to Ukrainian authorities, Vladimir Putin is preparing for another offensive on 3 fronts. Now let's go to Oz Chatterjee in Kyiv for the latest update. Good evening, Oz. So what can you tell us about these latest attacks on energy infrastructure?
Well, this claim came from the Ukrainian government, given by Ukraine's top diplomat, that's the foreign minister, Andrei Sybiha, gave these comments in a press conference earlier on with his Lithuanian counterpart. Let's take a listen to what Mr. Sybiha had to say in that conference.
After Riyadh, one of the agreements with the United States was not to strike energy infrastructure. However, Russia continues to violate this agreement. Energy facilities in Kherson, Kharkiv and Poltava have already been damaged. And this morning, another Russian strike damaged an energy facility in Kherson, leaving 45,000 residents without power.
Now, this news comes amidst report from the Deep State Monitoring Group that Russia's advances in Ukraine have slowed to their slowest point since June 2024. So the front lines in Ukraine have stabilized somewhat since that withdrawal from Kursk region that Ukraine was forced into, a rather significant withdrawal. But according to Deep State, the Russian advances have been slowing for many weeks now. However, the fear here, as you quite rightly pointed out, Don, is that Ukraine is worried that Russia is planning to make another further incursion into Ukrainian territory. that they're amassing troops and that this slowdown may be just so they have given time to prepare for this larger offensive. Now, there's also been some interesting new polling done by the Kyiv International Institute for Sociology, which puts the number of Ukrainians that fear that an unjust peace may be imposed on them by the Trump administration is at 54%. Majority of Ukrainians fearing an unjust peace there. Just 18% of Ukrainians polled by the Kyiv International Institute for Sociology saying that they have faith that there will be some sort of just peace through the mediation of the United States. So the Ukrainians are in a very difficult position here. However, they don't seem to be looking towards the future with any hope that anything positive is going to come out of it in the coming weeks at least. Back to you, Don.
Oz Chatterjee, indeed frightening statistics. Thanks for your report. The Polish government has completed negotiations on an agreement for the design of the country's first nuclear power plant. The new facility will be located in Lubiatowo-Kopalino in northern Poland. The site has been cleared and awaits construction works, which are scheduled to start in 2028. The plant is expected to begin operations in 2036 and will be designed by the American consortium Westinghouse Beechtel. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said that his government negotiated more favorable terms than the initial contract signed in 2023. Polish President Andrzej Duda signed a law last week that released over 14 billion euro in government subsidies for the project. The government funding is still awaiting approval by the European Commission. The presidential race in Poland is heating up. Candidates are trying to get their platforms out to voters to garner as much support as they can. Security is the only issue that unites the frontrunners, Mayor of Warsaw and Civic Platform candidate Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki from Law and Justice. Our chief political correspondent Aaron Diamond takes a look at the politics of the presidential contenders.
Election campaigns are busy and brimming with political promises. And for centrist Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski, security is number one.
This is a core issue. This is one of the most important and fundamental challenges that everyone in Europe faces. So no wonder that in a presidential campaign we treat it as a priority.
He's the current frontrunner in the polls and is pushing for a National Security Council involving the president, a GDP defence spend bump to 5%, and veterans and former security detail to school the next generation of Polish forces. Also top of mind is liberalising abortion laws. On the other side of the electoral spectrum, it's a different picture.
I am a Catholic, I am a Christian, so my general position is of course in favour of life. In the case of rape, Polish law regulates this. This decision obviously belongs to the woman.
That's Karol Nawrocki, the right-wing candidate backed by the major opposition Law and Justice Party, speaking on the abortion issue. He agrees with Trzaskowski that spending on the Polish army should rise to 5% of GDP, but there the similarities end as he pushes for lower taxes and rejection of the EU's Migration Pact and Green Deal. His main challenger for second place is Sławomir Mencen, the leader of the far-right Confederation.
I am deeply convinced that one cannot kill an innocent child, even if that child is in some ways connected to an unpleasantness.
While Mencen's election programme pushes freedom of speech, paid university study fees and minimum involvement with the EU, a recent interview with Canal Zero on YouTube took a more alternative tone.
You don't have to be a doctor to fix a broken arm. You just have to know how the human body works. Physiotherapists know very well how the human body works.
One caveat remains for all three candidates, and that's the fact that the Polish presidency tends to have a so-called negative power. A president can veto bills going through Parliament, but they have little influence on what is adopted and don't usually get involved with formulating policies themselves.
The president does have some formal powers which are meaningful, but probably more important are the informal agenda setting powers that they have, the fact that they have this mandate which no other politician has, which means that they can insert themselves in the political debate and influence it.
On May 18, the country heads to the polls, and if no candidate gets a majority in the first round, the top two will head into a final face-off on the 1st of June. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
Ever since Russia failed to protect ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh from Azerbaijan, Armenians see a little use of a military alliance with Russia. Membership in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, which is the Russian equivalent to NATO, for Armenia seems to be doomed. A final nail in that coffin may have been driven as the German president paid a visit to Yerevan. Aisha Bachi reports.
The same day German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier arrived to Yerevan, the Armenian Foreign Ministry officially reiterated their refusal to contribute to the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. The CSTO is a military-political alliance under Russia's influence comprising of Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. Yerevan has been vocal in its criticism of the organization.
Armenia has both frozen its participation and suspended its financial contributions as well.
Armenia's attitude stems from several years of frustration with Russia's failure to provide security, especially in the war of 2020 with neighboring Azerbaijan over the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Azerbaijan has signed an agreement, a partnership with Russia in the military field. And of course, Armenia is worrying that in case of an Azerbaijani attack towards the republic, that Russia may not intervene. So, of course, they are looking for some reassurance coming from the Western world.
According to experts, Armenia may not be the only country in Russia's so-called near abroad moving away from Moscow. After Yerevan, Tashkent, Astana, or Bishkek may follow.
Surprise and shock at Russia's military incompetence, where there's much less fear of Russia in Central Asia and much more of a willingness to go on their own in terms of Central Asia following its own path and becoming less submissive to Russia.
In a sign of shifting alliances, on April 4th, the EU will soon hold its first ever Central Asia summit in Uzbekistan, aiming to deepen its ties with the region.
EU engagement is based on attraction. Russia's engagement has long been based on coercion and pressure.
Clearly, these republics are trying to distance themselves and not be associated anymore with the post-Soviet space or Russia itself.
With Armenia's parliament passing a bill on EU accession and Central Asian nations building stronger strategic ties with the West, the geopolitical landscape of the post-Soviet space could be shifting.
We will not let the French people have the presidential election stolen from them, far-right leader Marine Le Pen told French reporters today after being convicted of embezzlement and barred from politics for 5 years. U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters, "That sounds like this country. It sounds very much like this country." Meanwhile, right-wing leaders in Europe, such as Hungary's Viktor Orban, the Netherlands' Geert Wilders, and Poland's Mateusz Morawiecki are all coming to the defense of Le Pen, rallying for her cause. And now to discuss whether this is a political witch hunt, as some claim, or is it the rule of law at work in a healthy democracy, I'm joined by Wawrzyniec Konarski, rector at Vistula University of Warsaw. Hello, and thank you very much for coming in and joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening to you, of course, to everyone.
Yes, now an unfair attack on the leading candidate or the letter of the law. What's your opinion on what happened with Marine Le Pen?
Whenever you touch upon any issues which are appearing within the political life, the political market, there's normally a situation in which, of course, interpretation is something which matters. Interpretation is delivered by people who are involved in the certain case, which means, of course, Marine Le Pen and all of the supporters, including some of the top politicians like Mr. Morawiecki and Mr. Orban, will be absolutely on her line, on her side. There is, of course, those who are going to underline the issue of the rule of law will say that the rule of law is here, the most important issue. But I'm afraid that from the purely political point of view, and especially from the point of the cleavages which are right now visible within the French society, we have to say that this will lead to the very deep cleavages even more than we can notice right now. Any such situation will definitely divide society into two rather not being ready to find anything which might be the, let's say, reconciliation among them. So Marine Le Pen will definitely use purely political argumentation and not being ready, in my mind, to explain if she was really involved in any, let's say, not legal types of the behavior. Whereas those who will be attacking her will be saying that, of course, this is not a political revenge, but just a matter of the rule of law. As we may say it, the truth perhaps is in the middle, as always.
Well, even Le Pen's political opponents didn't believe that that particular provision of the law would be enforced, the ban on politics for 5 years. Is this one of those cases where, well, and apparently, I must add that it was the initiative of the far right to have judges enforce such a ban when somebody breaks the law, especially when it comes to mishandling finances, public finances. So with both of those things said, is this simply an issue of the law works as long as it's not applied to me?
What we really need right now within the very many European countries is to deliver some argumentation that the rule of law are those which matter. Because I'm afraid sometimes we are ready, and including me, to call our contemporary political elites within some European states and also within the EU as too much plutocratic, which means that not issues which should base on the merits, but on the position, especially on the capital, on the wealth, which matters and which definitely may be used as the argumentation for someone to be involved in politics. But I think your argumentation you mentioned is quite interesting and goes in a bit perverse way, because if there is a certain political camp which definitely declared already that law has to be very harsh, and afterwards suddenly they notice that this law is also harsh against them, this is a sort of the political trap. Sometimes it's better to keep mouth shut and not to go too far, because if you go too far, you definitely may be accused for the same argumentation.
It certainly seems so in this case. Now, right-wing leaders from Europe are voicing their support for Le Pen, and even the White House is concerned with these developments. Now, could this ruling, in fact, affect the political scene across Europe? Could conservatives or right-wing parties get a boost from what's happening to Le Pen?
In order to be more, let's say, detailed as far as the ideological aspect is concerned, we have to say that this is in fact the issue of the right-wing populism, because populism is, I mean, the phenomenon which is reigning over Europe, I'm afraid, right now. By the way, if we may compare populism ideologically, because it's not a cohesive ideology, it's an amalgamation of the ideologies, sometimes very different. If we look upon, for instance, Latin America, the populism there is, or used to be, quite often left-oriented. In case of Europe, it is right-wing orientation, quite strong one, very strongly xenophobic and very strongly, I mean, argumenting that something must be done in order to change the nature of the existing nation states, but coming back to the old idea of nation state at the cost of any types of the integration. So this is in fact a very vital type of the competition between the completely different political types of the thinking, which means the tribalism, political tribalism, will be, I'm afraid, still very strong within European societies, and it will, of course, have certain impact on the existence, for instance, the rule of law in the very many states. Personally, I'm always quite afraid from the point of view if I'm just a citizen, but I'm not afraid of these changes whenever I think about myself as a political sciences specialist, because it's always a kind of the political harvest for me.
All right, and final question. We have just very briefly, I'd like to ask you, what's next, do you think, in the French political scene? Marine Le Pen wants to appeal this decision, but it's still unknown whether the appeal process will be in time for the 2027 elections. What happens next? Does the next person in line in her party go up to be a presidential candidate? Will the courts hear this in an expedited fashion? What do you think?
I think that whatever courts decide in French, in contemporary France, the assets of the party of Marine Le Pen and Mr. Bardella will be absolutely rising, in my mind. And this will be, again, also, it has to be confronted with the fact that President Macron does not have a very stable and very strong position. And he is having, as we definitely know, quite many, I would say, enemies, and the large portions of the French society is not in favor of him. So, finally, I think the entire operation against Le Pen is quite risky as far as the political stability in France is concerned. So it has to be balanced in a certain way.
Okay, Wawrzyniec Konarski, rector at Vistula, University of Warsaw. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you too.
Appreciate it. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.